All right, buckle up because today we're diving deep into the scandals. You know, the ones that followed Bill Clinton throughout his presidency.
Yeah.
We've got some really interesting stuff from an episode of the American History Hit podcast.
Okay.
It's called Why Was Bill Clinton's Presidency Synonymous with Scandal?
Hmm.
And they talked to this professor, Peter Ling, who's kind of an expert on presidential scandals.
Yeah.
And honestly, he's got some pretty sharp insights.
Yeah.
By the end of this, you'll not only get what happened, but also like the bigger picture.
Right.
Why were the Clinton years so important in how we see the presidency? Even, American politics as a whole, like it's a turning point.
Yeah, it's really interesting how Clinton's presidency, was from 1993 to 2001. It's viewed so differently depending on who you talk to.
Right.
I mean, some folks look back all fondly on the good times economically.
Right.
But then others, they just focus on the scandals. It's like, was he just a magnet for controversy or was there something else going on?
Right. That's a great question. And Professor Ling, he kind of suggests that you can't really understand the scandals without looking at like the whole picture of the time.
Yeah.
It was when 24-hour news was taking off.
Oh, yeah.
And the media was getting more and more, partisan. So every little like misstep, every rumor, it was just blown up huge.
Absolutely. It was like the perfect recipe for a scandal.
Right.
You've got that media landscape plus Clinton's personality and his background.
Yeah.
Professor Ling actually points out that Clinton's family history, there was infidelity there. And that could have played a role in how things unfolded. And he had this undeniable charisma.
Oh, yeah.
He can make people feel so special,
Right.
But sometimes that charm, it might have blurred the lines a little in his personal life and in his political dealings, too.
Yeah, that makes sense. But wasn't this whole like obsession with scandals and politics already happening before Clinton got into office?
Uh-huh.
I mean, the 80s had, their fair share of political messes too, right?
Yeah, you're right. Think about Ted Kennedy
Yeah.
and Chappaquiddick.
Oh, yeah.
Or Gary Hart and that whole monkey business
Yeah.
thing. What you see in the 80s is this rise of really aggressive opposition research and negative campaign. It was like a change in how politics worked.
Right.
Scandals became like a weapon.
So it sounds like the stage was kind of set for this scandal-driven politics before Clinton even came along.
Exactly, yeah. And from the get-go, Clinton's presidency was battling multiple scandals.
Right.
There was Whitewater, that real estate deal, super complicated, involving the Clintons and their business partners, the McDougalls.
Oh, right, Whitewater. Wasn't Hillary Clinton's role in that a big part of the controversy?
Yes. Her financial decisions in that whole deal, they were under a microscope.
Yeah.
And even though, they never proved any wrongdoing, Whitewater kind of became this symbol of corruption.
Right.
That followed the Clintons throughout their whole careers, really. And then there was Jennifer Flowers.
Right.
She publicly accused Clinton of a long-term affair. She even had tapes to back it up.
That whole thing with Flowers and how the Clintons addressed it on 60 Minutes,
Yeah.
it felt so, like, calculated, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like a political move to control the story?
It definitely had that vibe to it. And then you had the travel office firings and Nannygate.
Oh, yeah.
Smaller scandals, but they fed into this image of Clinton. Untrustworthy.
Right.
Maybe willing to bend the rules a little too much.
Right. And of course, there's Vince Foster's suicide.
Oh, yeah.
A close friend of the Clintons, their lawyer.
Right.
His death, it happened at Fort Marcy Park, became a breeding ground for all these conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And it really put even more heat on Whitewater. It's hard not to think about the pressure he must have been under with all those scandals going on.
It's a real reminder of how these political fights can have a human cost.
Yeah.
And this is when we start to see what Professor Ling calls the Get Clinton machine. This group of conservative, political operatives and lawyers who were just determined to bring him down.
Wasn't Kenneth Starr the one who led that charge?
He was. Starr was this conservative lawyer appointed as independent counsel to investigate Whitewater.
Okay.
And that meant he had all these powers to investigate anything he thought was wrong, even if it went beyond Whitewater itself.
So he wasn't just looking into a real estate deal. He was basically given a free pass to dig up whatever he could on the Clintons.
Pretty much.
Wow.
And then in 1994, the Republicans win big in Congress, with Newt Gingrich leading the way. That really emboldened this whole Get Clinton movement.
Sounds like the stage was set for a major showdown. Did Starr and his team ever actually find something solid to charge Clinton with?
Well, the Whitewater thing, it didn't really pan out the way they wanted.
Mm.
So they started looking elsewhere.
This is all during Clinton's first term, right?
Right.
So what about after he was reelected in 1996? Did the Get Clinton folks back off?
Not at all.
Mm.
In fact, things got even more intense during his second term.
Really?
Professor Ling actually says the scandal machine kicked into overdrive.
What happened? Was there something specific that set it off?
Well, a woman named Paula Jones, she filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against Clinton.
Okay.
She claimed that he propositioned her back when he was governor of Arkansas.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court allowed the lawsuit to go forward, which was a big deal because it set this precedent that a sitting president could actually be sued in a civil case.
I can see how that would put even more pressure on Clinton. Did this case uncover anything new about his behavior?
It kind of added to this, this existing story that Clinton had a pattern of acting inappropriately towards women.
Mm.
And then, of course, there was the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Yeah, that's when things get really messy, right?
Absolutely. Monica Lewinsky was a White House intern who started a sexual relationship with Clinton.
Okay.
And Linda Tripp, she was a coworker of Lewinsky's, she secretly recorded conversations they had about the affair. And then she gave those tapes to Kenneth Starr.
So Tripp basically, betrayed Lewinsky's trust to help the Get Clinton people.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
It was controversial, for sure, but those tapes gave Starr the evidence he needed to go after Clinton. Perjury and obstruction of justice.
Right.
Because of his attempts to cover up the affair.
And that led to Clinton's impeachment, right? Yeah.
The House of Representatives voted to impeach him based on what Starr presented.
Didn't Clinton famously deny the whole thing with Lewinsky?
He did.
What did he say exactly?
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
Didn't that come back to haunt him later?
Oh, yeah. Once the truth came out, it really hurt his credibility. And people really pushed for him to be removed from office.
So what happened? Was he removed from office?
No. In the end, the Senate acquitted him. So he stayed in office.
Mm.
But the whole thing left a stain on his legacy and made American politics even more divided.
So even though Clinton survived the impeachment, it sounds like the scandals had a lasting impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Clinton scandals were more than just personal stuff.
Right.
They showed how divided American society really was.
Yeah.
And they highlighted how much power the media had to shape what people thought.
It's amazing how this all happened before social media was even a thing. Can you imagine how much more intense the scrutiny would be today?
It's crazy to think about, right? Would Clinton have even been able to survive in today's media world?
It makes you wonder how much the media has changed how we view the presidency.
Definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
But, beyond all the scandals, Clinton actually did accomplish some important things during his presidency.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. What were some of his achievements, outside of all the drama of the scandals?
Well, it's interesting to look at how he tackled health care.
Yeah.
Remember, that was a big campaign promise.
Right.
And Hillary Clinton played a big role in developing the plan.
Yeah. They wanted universal health care coverage, right? That was a pretty ambitious goal. What happened with that?
They faced a ton of opposition, Republicans and even some Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it didn't make it through Congress.
That must have been a huge blow for the Clintons. Healthcare reform is such a complicated issue.
It was definitely a setback, for sure. But even though they couldn't get universal health care passed, they did get the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, signed into law.
Mm.
That expanded access to health care for millions of kids.
That's a big accomplishment, especially when you think about how tough it is to pass anything major when the political climate is so divided. It seems like they found a compromise that actually made a difference for people. So healthcare was a mixed bag with some wins and some losses. What about the economy? How did Clinton handle that part of his presidency?
Well, during his time, the economy grew pretty steadily.
Okay.
Unemployment was low, and there was even a balanced budget for a while.
Mm.
He also signed NAFTA.
Right, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah, it sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah.
But it did lead to more trade and economic ties between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
NAFTA was pretty controversial, wasn't it?
It was. Some people said it cost American jobs. Others said it boosted trade and made things cheaper for consumers.
So, kind of like with healthcare, there were pluses and minuses to his economic policies. It's like finding that perfect balance is always tricky, especially when you're dealing with stuff that affects so many people. Professor Ling talks about Clinton's economic approach as a third way. Can you explain what he means by that?
The third way is like a mix of traditional Democrat and Republican ideas about the economy.
Okay.
Clinton liked free trade and fiscal responsibility, which are usually associated with Republicans.
Right.
But he also focused on investing in education, job training, and technology, which are more Democrat-leaning priorities.
That sounds like a pretty practical approach, trying to find common ground between different sides. Was that typical of how Clinton governed?
Yeah, I think it shows how he could adapt to the political situation and find solutions that appealed to a lot of different voters. But not everyone was happy with his economic policies.
Right.
Some critics said his approach made income inequality worse and helped big corporations more than working families.
So even with the good economic stuff, there were still legitimate concerns about who is really benefiting.
Absolutely.
It seems like finding solutions that work for everyone is just a constant struggle in politics.
For sure. And on top of all that, Clinton also had to deal with challenges on the social and cultural front. The 90s was a time of big cultural shifts.
Right.
And there were debates about things like abortion, gay rights, and gun control.
Those issues are still so relevant today.
Yeah.
What was Clinton's stance on these, like, hot-button topics?
He often took a more centrist position, trying to find a middle ground.
Okay.
Like with gay rights in the military, he signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
That was pretty controversial back then, right?
Yeah.
What did that policy do exactly?
It was a compromise, I guess you could say.
Right.
It allowed gay and lesbian service members to serve, but only if they didn't tell anyone about their sexual orientation. At the time, it was seen as a step forward. But looking back, it definitely fell short of true equality.
Yeah, it's interesting how much progress we've made on LGBTQ plus rights since then. It shows you that progress on social issues often takes time and happens in stages.
For sure. And on gun control, Clinton signed the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which made background checks mandatory for gun purchases.
Okay.
And he also signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which banned assault weapons.
Those are pretty significant laws, especially considering how much opposition there is to gun control from certain groups.
They were. But unfortunately, those laws have been challenged, even weakened over time. It shows how tough it is to find agreement on gun control in the U.S.
So it seems like Clinton made some progress on those issues, but we still got a long way to go. When you put it all together, the economic wins, the social and cultural battles, and of course all the scandals, it paints a pretty complex picture of the Clinton years.
Definitely. It was a time of both progress and division.
Yeah. Right. Did his personal scandals affect how well he could govern? Or was he able to kind of separate those things?
It's fascinating how he got so much done, even with all that scrutiny and opposition. He balanced being practical with bold moves. His legacy on a lot of key domestic issues is mixed, but definitely impactful.
Yeah, it's almost like his ability to separate his personal life from his job allowed him to keep governing despite all the controversy swirling around him.
It is kind of paradoxical.
Right.
How can a president with all that personal and political turmoil still achieve so much policy-wise?
Yeah. It's a good reminder that the presidency is a really complicated job with many different aspects, and even people who make serious mistakes can still have a lasting impact on the country.
What's also striking is how the Clinton scandals kind of paved the way for the even more polarized and divided political world we see today.
Right.
The intense partisanship, the weaponization of scandal, the loss of trust in institutions, it all has roots in that era.
It's a cautionary tale. It reminds us about the dangers of out-of-control partisanship.
Yeah.
And it reminds us about how important it is to hold our leaders accountable, but also to recognize that their roles are complex.
Absolutely. We got to be critical of the information we're getting, especially now with so much media and misinformation out there.
It's about understanding what these scandals really meant, recognizing that even powerful people have flaws, and appreciating the historical context.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that the Clinton scandals were a turning point. They shaped how we view the presidency and our whole political system.
And maybe most importantly, we got to learn from the mistakes of the past to create a more informed and engaged public for the future.
Well said. But remember, the Clinton years weren't just about scandal. Let's dig into some of the things he achieved in terms of policy, both the successes and the challenges. We'll see how he managed a divided Congress, dealt with important domestic issues, and shaped America's role in the world. We were talking about how Clinton got things done even with all the drama going on.
Right.
But what about, his role on the world stage? How did he handle foreign policy?
Well, it's interesting. That's where we see a different side of Clinton. He didn't have much experience with foreign policy when he came in.
Right.
But he learned fast.
Okay, so what were some of the big foreign policy things he had to deal with?
Early on, there was the Bosnian War.
Right.
brutal conflict in southeastern Europe. At first, Clinton was cautious,
Yeah.
but in the end, he authorized U.S. military intervention.
So he wasn't afraid to use American power when he thought it was needed.
Exactly. But he also really believed in diplomacy
Okay.
and working with other countries. He worked closely with NATO allies and the UN to find peaceful solutions.
Right.
And he pushed hard for expanding free trade around the world.
Didn't he get some pushback for that?
He did. Some argued that globalization was costing American jobs and only helping corporations, not workers. It's a debate that's still going on today.
It's interesting how those economic arguments tie into foreign policy, too.
Yeah.
Were there any other big moments in his foreign policy record?
Well, he tried to broker peace in the Middle East. He hosted those negotiations between Ehud Barak, the Israeli prime minister, and Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader, at Camp David.
Right.
They didn't reach a lasting peace agreement, but it shows how committed he was to trying to solve some of the world's toughest conflicts.
So you have a president dealing with scandal at home and then trying to handle these international crises and peace talks.
Right.
That's got to be a lot to handle.
It was incredibly demanding.
Yeah.
It shows how being president is a complex job, and you got to be able to do a lot of things at once and make tough calls under pressure.
When we look back at the Clinton presidency now, with all the good and the bad, what do you think are the most important takeaways?
I think it's really important to see how what happened back then, both the political stuff and the scandals, shaped how we see politics today. The rise of partisan media, the focus on personal lives, using scandals as a political weapon, all those trends we see now have roots in the Clinton years.
So even though he left office a while ago, his presidency is still relevant to understanding our political landscape today.
Exactly. History is not just about the past.
Right.
It shapes our present and influences the future. And the Clinton years, even with all their complications, have valuable lessons about leadership, power, and what it means to have a democracy in a world that's increasingly divided.
It's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been so insightful. I bet our listeners have a much better understanding of the Clinton presidency now, beyond just the headlines and scandals.
I hope so. It's a fascinating time in American history.
Yeah.
One that's still shaping our political conversations today.
Well said. And on that note, we're wrapping up our deep dive into the Clinton presidency. We hope this exploration has given you a more complete picture of this complex and impactful era. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep having thoughtful conversations about the past and what it means for us now and in the future. Until next time.
We were just talking about Clinton getting things done on the domestic front.
Even with all the other stuff swirling around. But what about his role in the world, foreign policy?
Yeah, that's really interesting. We see a different side of him there.
Yeah.
He didn't come in with a lot of foreign policy experience.
Right.
But he learned quickly. He had to.
Yeah. What were some of the big challenges he faced on that front?
Well, early on, he had the Bosnian War.
Right.
A really brutal conflict in southeastern Europe. At first, he was pretty cautious.
Yeah.
But eventually, he authorized U.S. military intervention, which helped to bring about the Dayton Accords, which ended the war.
So he wasn't afraid to use American power when he thought it was necessary.
Exactly. But he also really understood the importance of diplomacy.
Okay.
And working with other countries, multilateralism. He worked closely with NATO allies and the United Nations, tried to find peaceful solutions to these international conflicts. And he was a big advocate for free trade globally.
Didn't he get some criticism for that?
Oh, he did. Some people argued that globalization led to job losses in the U.S., that it benefited corporations more than workers. Right. It's a debate that we're still having today.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting how these economic debates, they connect to foreign policy as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Were there any other notable moments in his foreign policy record?
Well, there was the Middle East. He tried to broker peace there. He hosted those negotiations between the Israeli prime minister, Ehud Barak, and Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader at Camp David.
Right.
Ultimately, those talks didn't produce a lasting peace agreement.
Yeah.
But it shows how dedicated he was to trying to solve some of the world's most difficult conflicts.
It's amazing you have a president dealing with scandals back home.
Yeah.
But also trying to handle these complex international crises and peace negotiations. It must have been incredibly demanding.
Oh, it was. It really highlights how being president is this multifaceted job.
Right.
You have to juggle so many things at once and make really tough decisions under intense pressure. Yeah, it's a tough job.
Yeah.
So when we look back at the Clinton presidency, with all of its highs and lows.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the key takeaways?
Well, I think it's important to understand how those events, both the political maneuvering and the personal scandals, how they shaped the way we view politics today. The rise of partisan media, the focus on personal lives, the willingness to use scandal as a political weapon. All these trends that we see today, they have roots in the Clinton years.
So even though he left office over 2 decades ago, his presidency is still relevant to understanding our current political landscape.
Absolutely. History isn't just something that happened in the past, right? It shapes our present and it influences our future. And the Clinton years, as complicated as they were, offer some valuable lessons about leadership, about power, and the challenges of democracy in a world that's becoming more and more divided.
It's definitely a lot to think about. This has been such an insightful deep dive.
It
I think
has.
our listeners have a much better grasp of the Clinton presidency
I
now.
hope so. Beyond just the scandals and the headlines.
It's a fascinating period in American history, one that continues to have an impact on how we talk about politics today.
Well said. And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the Clinton presidency. We hope this exploration has given you a more nuanced understanding of this complex and impactful era. We encourage you to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, and to keep having thoughtful conversations about the past and its relevance to us today, both now and in the future. Until next time.